Hey everyone, welcome to the FanMouth PGA Breakdown. This is the Masters edition. Really excited about that. A couple of my favorite things are the Masters Golf Tournament and fantasy sports, so we get to combine that this week. Really excited about it. Let me first introduce Chris Salati. You guys know him from this show, our resident expert, golf expert that gives us a lot of good advice. Chris, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Like you, I'm really excited. Had a great week, another new winner. But this week, it's Masters Week, completely different, unlike no other week in golf sports.
Yeah, totally different animal for sure. And then we've got Mr. Fantasy Dave Del Grande, a guy that's on a lot of he's been on basketball, baseball. This is his first time doing the PGA breakdown. So Dave, how you doing?
I'm just trying to learn something here, guys.
Humble Dave. Gonna give you like 2 or 3 sleepers that are gonna win you the tournament, I'm sure.
He's going to school us all. He's going to school us all.
Yeah, no doubt. So what we usually like to do here is have Chris give you a breakdown of the course and the type of golfers to look for when setting your lineups. So Chris, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, there's no real secret here. I mean, Augusta National, from playing it on Tiger for the younger generation or the older generation watching Jack and Arnold walk down the fairways, par 72, 7,435 yards, Alistair McKenzie, Bobby Jones design. It's been lengthened since, over the years. In 2000, it was 6,985 yards. Now it's at the 7,400 mark, so much longer. Big change, no Eisenhower tree, the famous Eisenhower tree on 17. That's gone due to the ice storm. You're going to see, players, you want to focus on the par 5s, 2, 8, 13, and 15. Those are the scoring holes on this course. That's Amen Corner, 13, the end of Amen Corner. You got the shaved banks, you got the runoffs, extremely fast greens, just like last week, but this is the Masters. You're looking for guys that want to hit the greens. They hit the greens in regulation. They're accurate off the fairway, and they have a lot of experience because experience matters at Augusta National.
Well, interesting you bring up experience because I wanted to start with the sleepers, and there's a bunch of experience in the sleepers. You've got a bunch of the veterans like Craig Stadler, Ben Crenshaw, Mark O'Meara, Ian Woosham, a bunch of guys that have won this tournament and have maybe a little past their prime, to be kind, but that might be the direction you're going to have to go if you want some of these big names like Adam Scott, Roy McIlroy in your lineup. So I think what we do this week is maybe start off with the price range, using DraftKings salaries here of like the 4,000 to 7,000 range. And Dave, is there anyone in that group that you like?
Well, actually, there's a couple. One is one of these veteran guys that you're talking about, not quite as old as some of the guys that you mentioned, but a guy who's been around, a veteran of European Ryder Cup teams, is Thomas Bjorn of Sweden. To me, if I'm looking for who's going to win the Masters, I agree with a lot of the stuff that Chris said. You have to find a guy with Masters experience, and a veteran player more likely is going to win than not. But someone with Masters history, and what the twist that I would put on it is, I think there's been 2 important or most important tournaments that have happened so far this year. The WGC event in Arizona and the WGC event at Doral. And I would look at those 2 events and say, if you can stand up to the competition at those events, then you've proven that you have the ability to at least compete at the Masters. And this is where Bjorn, I think, stands out. First off, he's been 37th and 46th the last 2 years at the Masters. He's got a lot of experience there. He's been making the cut there. He was 17th at the WGC in Arizona. He was 44th at Doral. So, again, someone who's made cuts at these tournaments, playing fairly well right now, a veteran guy with some success at Augusta, and price of 6,100. So I think among the long shots, among the lower price guys, he's someone who I think you could put on your roster and get some production out of.
Chris, is Bjorn on your list?
Bjorn is definitely on my list. I love the Great Dane. Like Dave said, he's a big game player. At the WGC events, he's solid. He's confident. He's had the tie. He's had the tie for 37th and 46th the last 2 years. Bjorn's a solid player. I will counter him with a guy that I love who has a lot more experience at Augusta, He's a little older, granted, but at 5,600, Bernard Langer is my guy at that range, where he's a two-time champ, granted 85 and 93, but last year he tied for 25th. And on the senior tour, he's 4th in greens in regulation, 5th in putting. He's in the top 5 every week on the senior tour, so he's playing, and he's playing well, and he knows Augusta. So if I'm spending that kind of money, I could go 500 less, and I feel really confident about Bernard Langer.
I'm going to one-up you. Okay, you've got Bjorn at – I look at Vegas odds a ton, obviously. Anyone who's ever seen this show before knows that I put a ton of weight into what Vegas thinks and how they expect the tournament to shake out. So you got you've got Bjorn at 200 to 1, which, you know, for that price, that's about what you expect. And then Langer's 250 to 1. I've got a guy that's even cheaper, and his odds are 100 to 1, which is, you know, twice as good as these other guys, and that's Thorbjorn Olesen. Obviously, his form of late is not very good, but he was 6th last year in the Masters, so he has good track history here. And I think, I mean, Chris will be the first one to tell you, you kind of throw everything else out the window, and you just kind of look at how they do it at the Masters, because, as he said in the introduction, it's a completely different animal. So I like Olesen here. The biggest reason is the Vegas odds. It looks like basically a price mistake to me, because if you look at the guys around 100 to 1, their price is around 8,500. So he's essentially priced 3,000 lower than he should be. I consider him a must-play this week. Not because I think he's going to win, or, you know, I think he's going to be extremely successful, but he's just way too underpriced to ignore. You know, you can't have a guy that's 3,000 lower than he should be and just let that go. You know, just kind of brush that off. You have to trust Vegas a little bit. They know what they're doing. They do a lot more, put a lot more man hours into setting their lines and everything. So they obviously have a feeling that Thorbjorn Olesen can compete here. But what do you think about that, Chris?
You know what? You know, I was surprised to see him that low. I wouldn't have put him at 8,500. That would have been way too high for him. He did finish 6th last year, like you said, at the Masters. The thing, I feel the reason why he's priced a little low is that they're looking at run-of play this year on American soil, which we kind of throw that out the window. But also, he's extremely erratic with his putter. If he gets his putter going, then he finishes 6th, and he's one of those young guys. But the nerves and him putting, it's all about putting at Augusta. So if that putter's not working for him, he could get frustrated. He's young, doesn't have the experience to lean back on, because, granted, his first time down, you know, Magnolia Lane and Augusta was great. But players do struggle, and it's how you handle adversity at Augusta will determine how you do in your career. So that's why I'm not as high as like a Bernard Langer at that same price range. But, you know, I'm surprised. I would have priced him, you know, at the 68 to 7,100 range.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. If he was 8,500, I definitely would have ignored him. But it's the fact that he's that much cheaper that I can't ignore him. I'm curious to get Dave's thoughts in a second here. But, I mean, basically, he's just, like I said, it's a value play. It's not about thinking that he's going to be extremely successful. It's feeling that he is extremely underpriced, maybe even a mistake. You know, these lines makers on these daily fantasy sites make mistakes too. So you got to capitalize on them when you can. And when you look at this sleeper list, these guys under 7,000, there is nothing down there. So you're going to have to compromise somehow. And I think that Olesen is a good way to get those high-price contenders in your lineup. But Dave, what do you think about what we've been talking about?
Well, and I agree with most everything you guys have said. I think that what you just said about picking a long shot is that the guy's a long shot for a reason. And it's not that, well, he finished in the top 10 last year. He's won 5 tournaments coming in. He's a Hall of Famer. Well, wait a minute. If that were the case, we'd be, a 10,000 range and one of the favorites. So there's going to be a blemish or two on every one of these guys. I do have another low price guy that I like, and the the way golf is played out these days, other than the United States, I think South Africa is as good a golf country as there is in terms of producing really high caliber players. And I think there's another one here on the horizon, or at least last year's Masters seemed to point to a young guy who might be on the rise, and that is Brandon Grace. Brandon Grace last year finished 18th at the Masters. He shot 70, 71, 69 in the last 3 rounds of the Masters, in his first Masters last year. To tie for 18th. It was quite a showing. Was it luck? Was it, what have it? That kind of put him on the world map. He came back this year. He finished in the top 40 at the 2 tournaments I talked about at the WGC events against the big boys. So he's someone who I think is on the rise in the world rankings. He's 5,600, very, very low price for a guy who I think is, he's probably 3 or 4 years away from becoming really a guy that we really should be talking about on this show. But based on his showing at Augusta last year and how he's done at these big events, I think 5,600 is a very nice price.
Yeah, and you hear even us and plenty of the experts out there talking about how you want to avoid the rookies in this tournament because there's only been one that's won it, right? But you just brought up a guy that's had success in his first showing. I talked about Olesen in his first showing, finished 6th. So there's obviously guys that can compete and produce well, just maybe not take home the trophy. But Chris, how do you feel about Brandon Grace?
I like him. I'll add on to what Dave was saying. High ball hitters succeed at Augusta National, and he's a high ball hitter. He hits it well. He hits it far. If he could get the putter under control, which he did last year, which he's done this year, he's a solid play. And at 5,600, I would throw him in a couple lineups definitely because I feel better about him at 5,600 than a lot of the other guys at that low under 7,000 range. And I think we mentioned the 3 or 4 guys that are worth considering at that range. The only other guy I would throw in there is a former major winner, and that's Vijay Singh at 6,200. Who's 35th in greens and regulation, has a tie for 27th in 2012, tied for 38th in 2013. So playing well the last 2 years, run of form. He's played pretty well this year. That's the only other guy that I would think of, but I think we covered our basis.
Yeah, we talked briefly about, here's a guy that's on the borderline of that range that we're discussing. He's at 7,000, and as I was trying to set my lineups yesterday, I was running some names off of Chris and seeing what he thought. And the guy who showed up at question mark at the end of his name, John Huh, is someone that came up yesterday. And Chris, what do you think about him? Did you end up coming off of him and not, kind of deciding against him, or is that someone you'd still consider at that, that borderline sleeper range at 7,000?
Yeah, it was hard to fit him in some of my lineups because I tried to get some of the marquee guys in there, guys that could win the tournament, and then I was left with 5,600 or 6,100. So trying to get a 7,000 and pair him with somebody is harder. But he finished 11th last year in his first appearance. Played well last week in Houston, similar course. Granted, the weather was a little different and it made the course softer, so it was kind of misleading. But definitely John Huh at 7,000. If you can fit him in there and you have 7,000 left in your budget and you have a balanced lineup, I think there's no better choice.
Well, let's move on to the next category then. I feel like we're ready to move on here. And again, I mentioned our discussions yesterday, Chris, because that's when I did a lot of my lineup building. But you convinced me on a guy that I had zero interest at all. There was no way I was going to have him in my lineup. And Chris rattles off all these stats, and I'm going, oh, wow, I have to play this guy, right? And that guy's Freddie Couples. So, Chris, why don't you sell everyone else on why Freddie Couples is a great play today?
How can you not play Fred Couples at the Masters? I feel that there's going to be a statue of him when he's retired and long and gone. There's going to be a statue of him at Augusta. Look at the last 3 years. 2011 tied for 15th. 2012 tied for 12th. 2013 tied for 13th. And each of those years, he was in the final pairings on Saturday going into Sunday. He just had 1 or 2 bad shots. He's the 1992 champ. He's at 7,200, like you said. And no matter how he's playing, and he's playing well. Him and Bernard Longer are the number one and number two players on the senior tour, so he's playing well. He had a couple back issues last week as far as just tightness. He got that worked out. But once he enters those gates, completely different Freddie. It's the Freddie of old. It's boom, boom. That was his nickname back in the day. And he still hits it for, being over 50. He still would rank, in the 70 to 80th range on tour in distance. And it's going to be dry out there this week. So he'll get the distance, he'll get the roll. And Freddie at 7,200, he's a must-play. At Augusta, he's guaranteed to be in the top 30, I feel.
And yeah, you might not have these stats in front of you, but one of the things you said that absolutely blew me away was something to the effect of him missing 2 cuts in the last, 20 or 30 years. 2008, 2009, I believe it was, were the only 2 cuts that he missed. Is that pretty much in line with?
Yeah, it was back-to-back, 08, 09, I believe, where he had those back issues. He was really working it out. Then you notice he switched to those Ernie Els type shoes, the new flat sole shoes, retro golf shoes. Changed his back issues for good, basically. And he's only missed 2 cuts in his entire Masters career, spanning 25, 30 plus years at Augusta, and the last 3 years are top 20s.
Yeah, that's unreal. So Dave, get in here. What do you think? Freddie Couples a must play, or do you have a guy in this range you like better?
Absolutely. I rank him 10th on my list. I probably should have had ranked him higher. And if you look at 11 top 10 finishes at the Masters in his career, you think, well, sure, when he was 20 to 30 years old, he probably had 7 of those. But like Chris said, the last 3 years, top 15 every year in that run. It just seems that every year at Augusta, somehow, some way, he finds a way to stay in there, He's probably not going to win this event, but, is he going to finish in the top 10? Is he going to finish in the top 20? I think he's a very solid bet to finish in the top 20. And, I'm shocked when I saw his price was 7,200. I just thought, well, here's a guy with his history is so good at Augusta that you have to price him much higher than that. They didn't, and I think you got to take advantage of that.
So let's use the range of 7,000 and up to 9,000 and below. And is there anyone else you like in that range, Dave?
There is. There are 4 veteran players in that range, and I like all 4 of them. But I'm going to start off with one guy who's not a veteran player who's in this range, actually making his Masters debut here, which is kind of a red flag, but I'm going to make my case for him anyway. That's Jonas Blixt. He's a Florida State guy. He's played all the best courses in the Southeast. He's experienced on the good courses down there. He's got a top 17 and a top 16 at the WGC events this year. So he's played with the big boys. He finished 4th at the PGA last year. He's established himself as someone that can compete with the big boys. Now, well, geez, 7,300, that sounds like a great price for a guy who was 4th place at the PGA. Well, he's never played in this tournament before, so that's a reason in and of itself to avoid him. But all the other things to me say, you know what, you got to give him a shot at 7,300. So he's going to definitely make my list.
Yeah, for me, this is kind of where you're going to have to build the meat of your lineups. You're probably going to have 3 or so golfers in this range, at least, because there just aren't enough sleepers, as I talked about. So you're not going to have as many studs as usual. Like usually I can get 3 to 4 studs in my lineup, no problem, because I'll just punt with a couple sleepers that I feel have a decent chance of making the cut. But today, or this weekend, I don't think that's going to be the case. So you're going to have to build your lineups around this mid-range. And I think there's some interesting options here. Obviously, they all carry their own risks. I think Bill Haas is one of the best options. He's at 8,800, so just under 9,000. But he's another guy we talked about. Chris was mentioning how Olesen just can't get the putter working. And Bill Haas is another one of those guys who we actually talked about that fact last week. But if Bill Haas gets his putter working, he plays really well at the Masters, and he always competes. He could take this thing down fairly easily, I think, if he gets that putter working. So that's a guy I'm looking at. Of course, I've been looking at Jimmy Walker all year. He's been unreal this year. First timer though, right, Chris? Jimmy Walker?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's the big, the
There's
big
a lot of
scary
big
thing.
names that are first timers.
Yeah.
To go back to Dave's point with Jonas Blix, I like him at 7,300. It just really scares me, that he's a first timer. For the first timers, I would focus on Harris English and Patrick Reed. Granted, they're more expensive, but they're Georgia products. Augusta State for Patrick Reed, and he's played the course a ton of times. And Harris English, a high ball hitter. His game is tailor-made for Augusta. If you're looking at that 73, 74, 7,500, I like a guy that's a champ this year, Aussie John Senden at 7,500. He tied for 35th last year, cut in 2010, 2012, but he's playing well. He had good form last year. And interesting stat this year, on the PGA Tour, only Australians and Americans have won events. So it's either been an Australian or an American. You look at Stephen Bowditch, John Senden, and all the Americans that have won these tournaments. I'm going with the Aussie contingent at 7,500.
Yeah, interesting. The Aussies are a group that could absolutely have 1 through 3, finish 1 through 3 Australian golfers. No doubt, they've got a ton of talent. Who else are you looking at there in that range?
Well, in that range, my number one guy in that range, I feel, at 8,800 would be Lee Westwood, who has phenomenal success at Augusta. In 2011, he was 11th. 2012, he was 3rd. 2013, he was 8th. So, you're looking at top 15 finishes. He's playing okay, but like you said, like we've said, you kind of throw it out the window this week, and you'll see those big names up there. He's a veteran. He's looking for that major. He's really pushing to win Augusta. So he's right there on Saturdays and Sundays. So at 8,800, I like him. I like Jim Furyk just because he's consistent. He's accurate. He's deadly accurate. With the driver, and he has good success. Tied for 23rd last year, tied for 11th the year before. I like him in that group as well. So there's a lot of guys in that 7,000 to 9,000 range that will win you the fantasy week. That's where it's going to be won, that 7,000 to 9,000 range.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Who else do you like in this group, Dave?
Well, I agree with both of you guys have said that same thing. This is the key to your lineup here. And we've talked a lot about veteran players. There's a lot of, I think, really good veteran players in this group. Westwood and Furyk being 2 of them. But I actually rate 4 veteran players ahead of them, one being Couples we already talked about. A guy who's kind of the equivalent of Couples. Guy who, if you just looked at his recent form, you'd say, oh, man, this guy's not on his game. There's no way I'm picking him this week. But when you look at Angel Cabrera, he always seems to be there in the major championships. Finished 2nd here last year. In fact, in the last 5 years, he has a 1st, a 2nd, and a 7th at Augusta. He's a former U.S. Open champion. He has a career average of under 72 at Augusta. That's pretty darn good. I mean, again, this counts, yeah, he's old, but this counts all these years where he's been old. He still shoots around par or slightly under par, which is what you got to do to win this tournament. I think at 8,600, to me, he's a must-have in your lineup. I think he heads this list in this group of the veteran players who I think have a chance to win this tournament. There are 2 other guys who, again, who I'd put in the category of got a chance to win this tournament in this range, and that would be Charles Schwartzel and Graham McDowell. Again, 2 guys with proven major success, guys with a lot of experience here, and you between those 3 guys, Couples, Westwood, Furyk, we've already mentioned them. Those are 6 proven veteran players that you could form a nucleus of your team, and I think feel real good about yourself.
Yeah, and the thing with Angel Cabrera is he is one of those veterans that has had recent success, as opposed to a couple of the other guys we talked about. Their success was from 1993 or whatever. It's like Cabrera is still, even though he's a veteran, is still competing recently. So obviously he is a little less under the radar now. I mean, you look over the I used to bet on golf a lot. You look at the last, probably 4 or 5 years ago, and Cabrera was going into these major tournaments as like 200-1 underdogs because he would play the rest of the season horribly and then just randomly show up for these majors. But we end up finding out that it's not so random because it keeps happening. It's just he gets amped up for these majors. So now he's a little less of the underdog and more so on everyone's radar, but I still think he could be a good play, being that he is priced where he's at. I was expecting to go into these salaries and seeing him as one of these underpriced, undervalued guys again that just isn't getting any respect. But at this point, everyone's kind of caught on to that. So I don't like him as much as, being priced where he should be. He's totally priced right. It's just I used to like taking him a lot when he was the underdog, and that's not the case anymore. But Chris, any thoughts on anyone that Dave's talked about or anything?
Well, the secret's out. I mean, Cabrera, I feel that you can force him to play left-handed with 5 clubs and he'll still finish in the top 20.
With a broken leg.
With a broken leg. It doesn't matter. He was an inch away from beating Adam Scott last year on that playoff hole. If he makes that putt on the 10th, which was the second playoff hole, then he puts the pressure on Adam, and maybe he doesn't make that putt. Who knows? But, Cabrera is definitely a guy. One other guy that I would throw in there that is just, I love him as a person, just a character, and at 8,200, Miguel Angel Jimenez is the most interesting man in golf, and he has good history. In 2010 he finished 12th. In 2012 he finished 27th. You see him at all the majors pop up, smoking his cigar, belly hanging out with gorgeous women following him. He doesn't care, and he plays good golf in big tournaments.
He's like a TV character, man. Yeah.
He has the big ponytail in the back, and you just see his name, next to a Cabrera or some of these European guys that you're like, where did he come from?
Speaking of Cabrera, though, and Jimenez, a guy that's $100 cheap than Jimenez is KJ Choi. And KJ Choi reminds me of Cabrera in that he shows up for these majors a lot of the times, and you see him in contention on Sunday. So at 8,100, that might be the new Angel Cabrera, that he's a little underpriced and kind of has the same mindset of really liking these majors. So that might be the direction I go there. But either of you want to talk about anyone else in this price range, or do you want to get to the big boys?
I'm ready for the big guy, the heavyweights.
Let's go.
All right, so this is the last group. Basically, everyone's on the table now. This is the 9,000 to who's the highest price guy, 10,600 for Matt Kuchar. Oh no, I'm sorry, 11,000 for Rory.
Rory, the favorite, yeah.
I didn't see him because he's in my lineup, so he was off to the side. So obviously like him, but so this is obviously the big contenders, the guys that have the best shot to win this thing, the guys that have the best shot of not being cut, and these are the guys you want in your lineup, of course. But being that there's not a lot of sleepers, I don't know how many you can really get. I think comfortably you can get 2. If you want to take a lot of risk, you can get 3. But there's no way you're getting 4, in my opinion. But Dave, why don't you kick us off with who you like in this group?
Well, my number 1 choice in this tournament is Justin Rose. And the reason I like him is he's not one of these 40-plus-year-old veteran players, but he's got a lot of Masters experience. He's got a good scoring average at the Masters. He won a major last year, so he's proven that he can play at this level. He's always he's been one of those young European guys that just hasn't been able to break through. Last year he did break through. He has a top 8 and an 8th place and an 11th place in 2 of his last 3 Masters. Last year was 25th place. So he's been in contention at the Masters, just hasn't broken through there. Now that he's finally broken through at a major, I think maybe now's the time for him to break through at the Masters. So in a very tight competition, I think, among my top 4 or 5 choices. He's 9,700, which is a little bit less than some of the real big heavyweights. So that's why I put him on top of my list.
Man, you know why I avoided him, though? I heard in his practice round that he went through some equipment changes, and the whole practice round they were trying to figure out his yardage. Like, they couldn't figure out which club went which distance. And not that I can use this as a comparison at all, but I've done this before. Like I switched clubs, and then for like a month I couldn't figure out how far my 5-iron went. You know, I've obviously they're gonna have it a little more dialed in than me, but
A little
at the
bit.
same time, they are. It's obviously a concern right now, being that they are trying to figure out the yardages, and they're making this change for the Masters. It just doesn't make any sense to me. It seems desperate. Obviously, he wasn't extremely confident with the clubs he had and felt like that for the Masters, the biggest tournament in the world, he needed to make a change. So that's a big red flag to me, and I'm staying away from Rose. He's like my number one don't play. But Chris, break the tie there. What do you? No, Dave, go ahead.
What you have to realize is the reason you changed clubs in the first place because you didn't know how far your 5-iron was going. So what you expected that to change when you changed clubs? Come on.
True. Break the tie, Chris. What do you think about Rose?
Well, first of all, Dave, the only time Jeff plays well is when I'm standing next to him and I tell him hit the 6-iron or hit the 7-iron.
No, the only time I play well is when you say, "I bet you $20 you can't make this shot."
That's if I make it worth money, and he'll start to play well. He'll play like Justin Rose. To bring up Rose, I consider a bigger red flag than because you see the guys on the range tinkering all the time. Butch Harmon was out there with his 5 guys tinkering. They tinker all the time, changing clubs and stuff. Yeah, that's a big change and figuring out yardages. But I think by Thursday he'll get that down. The only red flag I have for Justin Rose is he's one of those guys, one of the 6 guys that's coming off an injury, and I know he's saying it's okay, the shoulder's fine. What else is he going to say? But you never know. Like Jason Day with the thumb, Dustin Johnson he claimed back spasms last week. That's why he pulled out shooting an 80 in the first round at Shell.
Faking it.
Yeah, exactly. Like Tiger with the surgery, just all the way through.
Wrong.
All the way through. And Justin Rose has that shoulder. It could be fine, but it's just something in the back of his mind, and just say, okay, when it comes down, if I'm in the woods and I have to put pressure on this shoulder, am I going to go full out, or am I going to just lay off 95%? It's a question for me.
And it's a subconscious thing too. It's not like he's actively thinking like, okay, I'm going to give this 95%. It's just like your natural instinct to protect your body. It's not a conscious decision. But Chris, talk about a guy that you like in this range then.
Well, my number one guy is Johnson, but it's Zach Johnson. The 2007 champ. He had tied for 32nd, tied for 35th the last 2 years, cut the year before. But I just get a sense that his short game and putting is so good and so tailor-made for Augusta National, and he's playing well coming into this tournament, that he's getting back to that true form. You saw him beat Tiger at Sherwood, holing out from the fairway. You see him at Augusta every year. Sometimes if he drives the ball well, which he usually does, he's very accurate with the driver, going for the par 5s. But if he has to lay up 100 and in, he'll put that ball within 5 feet most times and make the putt. So I feel very confident, and at 10,300, over a lot of those guys, I'm taking Zach Johnson for the win.
Well, you're emphasizing the Zach because I'm going to emphasize the Dustin. So yes. Basically, here's my argument for that. I mean, last week, whatever, I don't think he's really injured. I think he's fine. I think he had a bad round and didn't want to play the rest of. You have to list a reason when you withdraw. It can't just be like, I didn't feel like playing anymore. You have to give a legitimate reason for why you're withdrawing. So a lot of times golfers will just say, oh yeah, my back hurts, and that's an easy out. But if you look at the Vegas odds, you've got Zach Johnson and Dustin Johnson at the same price on DraftKings, right? But Dustin Johnson is 22-1, Zach Johnson's 28-1. So Vegas likes Dustin Johnson better. A lot of times I use that as my tiebreaker. And while 22-1 to 28-1, that doesn't seem like a huge difference. It is, I mean, that's in Vegas, that's a big deal. And think about if it's a difference of, 5 spots. If it's between 5th and, 1st and 6th, or 5th and 11th, I mean, it's a big deal. So I like Dustin. This is a guy that obviously his game sets up really well to win a bunch of majors, and he just hasn't been doing it. But I expect this to be, a nice role that he's going to get on, starting with the Masters here, and really be in contention for most of the majors from here on out. But Dave, what do you think about those guys, the Johnsons?
Don't ask me to break a tie here because I don't like either one of them. And the
No.
reason is that neither has competed here for several years. I mean, neither has been in the top 10 here in recent years. And you're talking about guy over 10,000 for a guy who has didn't like Cabrera didn't miss by an inch last year. Like Couples hasn't been in the top 10 several times. These guys have been outside the top 10 every year the last 3 or 4 years. And so I think Dustin Johnson comes in better form than Zach Johnson, but I'm not spending that kind of money for guys who, to me, haven't been in the mix here, the last 3 or 4 years.
Well, then give me another guy. You've got to like some more guys in this range as elite prospects to win this thing. Who else do you like?
Well, I think if you consider, I consider Adam Scott the favorite to win this tournament. He won last year, but he's also the second highest priced guy. And so I'm going to shy away from him and only drop down one notch. I think Matt Kuchar is playing as well as anybody right now. 6 top 10s this year in 9 events. Good scoring average here. Tied for 8th, tied for 3rd the last 2 years at Augusta. He has history here. He's playing well. He's the kind of guy that you want in a major championship or on your Ryder Cup team. Very, very consistent. You know he's going to be there. You know he's not going to beat himself. He has the experience. He's 10,600, which is just a small notch behind Adam Scott. But I just like his recent form, and I think he's been on the verge of winning, and I think this could be his year.
Well, are you at all concerned about his recent form, though? Because he's looked like he's going to win the last 2 tournaments, and he ends up fading on Sunday. So is that a concern for you at all, that maybe he can't deal with the pressure of the Masters?
Who else hasn't wilted, in the Tiger Woods era? I mean, to me, one of the reasons Tiger Woods has been so great for 15 years is because everybody else melts in his shadow. And we're going to talk about Rory McIlroy, but this is exactly the reason that I would not come anywhere near picking him in this tournament, because he just doesn't seem to be a guy that likes to win. On the grand stage, on the lower stage, he always finds a way to lose, and that's even when he's in top form. Half the time he's not in top form. You talk about a guy I wouldn't take if he were 2,000 lower than he is. He's the highest priced guy on the board. There's a guy that I wouldn't touch at all. But if Matt Kuchar finishes 3rd or finishes in the top 10 as he has the last 2 years here, I think I'm going to feel justified taking them at the high price.
Yeah, and I'll shoot this over to Chris in a second, but let me touch on a good point that you're making about Kuchar. Just hoping he ends up in the top 10, or actually not just hoping, but really feeling confident that he can. Same thing can be said about Rory. Maybe you don't expect him to win it, but for 11,000, it's a steep price. But you feel pretty confident that on Sunday he's going to be in contention at least. You feel like that's a very safe floor. Floor is a term we use in fantasy basketball and other sports, but for golf, maybe having a guy that you feel really confident is going to be in the top 10, I see that as being a good play. But Chris, any thoughts on what we're talking about?
Well, the problem with Kuchar is, just look at last week. He fell apart, and it wasn't against Tiger Woods. It was against Matt Jones.
Yeah.
That's a problem. And it's not the first time. So, yeah, he's finished in the top 10 a lot at the Masters. He's a Georgia Tech product, so he's at home. He flew home to Sea Island and then, hopped over today, so he's comfortable. But, when it comes down to Saturday and Sunday at Augusta on Amen Corner, and you look at the leaderboard and it's the, Mickelsons and Scotts and, it's 13th at Augusta and all the history and all the thoughts going through your head, I would, much rather take a guy that's cheaper, 2 guys, Mickelson and, a guy that I like at 10,000, Sergio Garcia, who is primed, tied for 35th in 2011, tied for 12th in 2012, and tied for 8th at 2013, so getting better and better and better, was in contention last week. But fell apart. But I think Sergio and Mickelson are 2 better options than Kuchar this week.
So, question though, 2-part question, I guess. do you think Sergio and Mickelson have a better shot at one, being in the top 10 than guys like Rory and Kuchar, and then two, have a better shot of winning it? Do you think that they are just better options overall, or is it the fact that you think they have a better shot at actually winning it?
I think Sergio has a better shot at winning it. I think Mickelson has a better shot at the top 10, if that makes it. Mickelson, his game is looking pretty good right now. He's a three-time champ. He's really motivated to get that fourth jacket. But Sergio's that wild card where he has so much talent that he's won some big events in his. He's won the Players. He's won some big stage events. That if he can hone that in and hit those fairways, and his putter's been working well over the past year. He's changed his putting a lot, which has made a big difference in his game. That's why he's doing better at Augusta. I think Sergio, firing on all cylinders, he has the best shot to win it.
Yeah, I think we have to mention Bubba too. Bubba is a guy that is going to absolutely crush the ball, of course, but you don't know if it's going to end up in the rough or in the trees or whatever. And I brought this up yesterday to you, Chris, and your point was, well, he's the best out of trouble. He's just because he ends up in the rough or the trees that isn't as big of a negative as it is for other golfers. So don't necessarily discount that fact. So Bubba, I think, is in play at his salary. He's less than anyone else we've really talked about as far as being a contender. He's less than Sergio Garcia even. So I like Bubba. How do you guys feel about him, Dave?
I don't like him. I think a lot of these guys that we're talking about here, to me, are just too inconsistent. Now, I do like the Sergio in the last 2 or 3 years has kind of built back to where he was supposed to have been 15 years ago or 10 years ago when he was supposed to be, the next great thing. And he had a terrible long stretch, but now is back and playing more consistently. Phil Mickelson, I think, is in terrible form. I think he does have a good history here, and you know how important this tournament is to him. It's got to be killing him that he's playing so poorly. I give him zero chance to win this tournament. And a guy that we haven't talked about, but the type of player who I think, like Kuchar, is going to be successful in a major championship, a very consistent player, is Hunter Mahan. At 9,200, he's finished in the top 12 3 times in the last 5 years at the Masters. He's got 4 top 10s this year in 8 events. He has a 4th place at the Open last year, 9th place at the British Open. He's a guy who's in contention a lot. He can compete at the majors, has history at Augusta, and at 9,200 is 1,000 less than some of these guys we're talking about. I just like that kind of consistency more than who has a better chance of winning this tournament, he or Mickelson? Well, probably Mickelson. I mean, Mickelson, if he has a great tournament, McIlroy, if he plays his best, these guys probably win the tournament. But to me, they're so wildly inconsistent that I don't expect them to play their best this week. And when the price is 10,000 or more, I'd much rather go with a more consistent guy.
Yeah, being that there's 97 golfers, you sometimes will skip over guys just due to the fact there are so many more. Yeah, I mean, he's not really a guy that I even gave much thought to, Hunter Mahan. So maybe a guy I need to look into a little more. But it's just one of those guys where you're scrolling through the names and it's like, no, not him, not him, not him, and you kind of just move on. So Chris, give me your thoughts on Hunter Mahan. Should I throw him in the lineup or no?
I would be cautious about Hunter Mahan. He's had some success at Augusta, but it's kind of been a roller coaster of just miscut, top 15, miscut, top 15, up and down, up and down. But at that price range, if you could afford it at $400 more, I would go with Brent Snedeker over Hunter Mahan.
I like
much better, track record of late at Augusta with, 3 top 20 finishes in a row, including a 6th last year. Very consistent player. Kind of under the radar because he's under that 10,000 mark. So if you get those 2 guys at 10,000 plus, you get Snedeker, with the top 10, and then you could fill in with a Freddie Couples and a couple of the lower guys we mentioned. One of the guys that we didn't mention, the U.S. Am champ Matthew Fitzpatrick, the basement. You throw him in at 4,800. You know, and you know, you have a really solid squad.
Just briefly, I want to discuss the Vegas odds again, maybe like the top 5 or 10 or so, just to give everyone an idea of how Vegas is seeing this. Basically, your favorites are tied, Adam Scott and Roy McIlroy at 10-1. Right behind them is Phil Mickelson, which I'm with Dave. I am not touching Phil Mickelson at all. There's we talk about kind of throwing away recent success and focusing only on the Masters, but Phil, I mean, just looking at Phil, it just doesn't look right. You know, he doesn't look the same. Kind of with Tiger. It's like Tiger doesn't look like Tiger. Phil doesn't look like Phil right now. So being one of the highest priced guys, I don't really like him. Jason Day, 14-1. Matt Kuchar, 18-1. Sergio Garcia, 20-1. Dustin Johnson, 22-1. And then you got a couple guys at 25-1 in Bubba Watson and Henrik Stenson. But
well, one quick note on Mickelson as well. The last few weeks, it all comes down to putting really with him. He's always been a great short game player and putter, but he likes to tweak things. The last few weeks, he's been meeting with Dave Stockton, who's kind of the putting guru now on tour, and he's, you know, I saw his press conference today, and Mickelson is beaming. He's one at Augusta, and two, his putter is working, he says, and with Dave Stockton helping him out. You know, I would reconsider that. And, you know, with Mickelson, thinks it's the Freddie Couples syndrome and Angel Cabrera syndrome and Phil Mickelson and all these guys that you're like, how in the world is he playing well? But they are ready for Augusta.
Yeah, I don't like guys that are tinkering going into the Masters. To me, that just screams lack of confidence, and I don't like that at all. But Dave, final thoughts on anything? I think we covered a lot of golfers. If there's anyone you missed, we feel like we should talk about.
I think we are. You know, we've touched on this guy briefly, and maybe I'd certainly like to hear more from Chris on this guy because he doesn't fit the profile of a guy who's going to win this week, but everything else about him says this guy's going to win a Masters eventually, and that's Harris English. Chris talked about how his game seems to fit this course. He's a Georgia kid. He's had 6 top 10s already this year. You know, he was tied for 9th at the WGC in Arizona, 16th at Doral. He had a 14th place at the Palmer. I mean, he's playing well. Everything about this guy says, you know, hey, he's going to be there this week, except for the fact that he's never been in this tournament before. So I like him at 9,500, but I'll give Chris a chance to talk me off of it.
I was going to say, I can tell you what Chris is going to say. It's that he's never played in this tournament before, so probably to avoid him. But go ahead, Chris.
He's never played in this tournament before. No, Harris English, like I said earlier, Harris English and Patrick Reed, out of the 24 newbies in this tournament this year, which is a record, Harris English and Patrick Reed are my top 2. I picked Harris to win at Doral. You know, I thought he was after the first 2 rounds, and then he fell off, finished 16th. Still a good showing. Game is tailor-made for Augusta, played the course before, Georgia product. It's just, you know, comparing him to a couple of the other guys in that price range with experience, it's hard because it's just different. You're living all those emotions as a player, all those, you know, putts as an 8-year-old and 9-year-old and 10-year-old. Like, this putt is to win the Masters. Well, you know, he's going to have a putt to make the cut, or he's going to have a putt to, you know, keep his round going at the Masters on 13, on 16, you know, with everybody watching. So, you know, it takes a couple times. You know, my philosophy this week mainly is, you know, not taking a guy who hasn't been there at least 3 years. You know, which, you know, a lot of guys I'm not taking because it's just they lack the experience at Augusta. That being said, I'm not going to talk you, you know, completely off the ledge on Harris English, but I would take a few other guys. But definitely Harris English is the future. You know, at 24 guys, somebody's going to make the cut, and I think it's going to be Harris English.
Well, here would be my question about him, is that I'm guessing, you know, given who Harris English is, the opportunities he's had in his lifetime, the proximity to Augusta, I'm guessing that he's played Augusta more than at least a third of this field, if not half of this field, in his lifetime. And how much am I overstating that?
You're not. It's just competitive rounds are completely different than playing Augusta in whatever in August, with a member, and nobody watch it. It's just, and it's not in tournament condition. Say the greens are, they're going to be a 14, 15 for tournament competition. Well, they're a 9 and a 10 during, because when the Masters stops, they start prepping for next year's Masters. They kill off some grass, they work with some things, they move some pins around. The banks aren't shaved as completely as they are in tournament competition. So the course is completely different. Being there, yes, he's familiar with the course, he's familiar with the layout, but he's not familiar with tournament competition at the Masters, and that is a big factor.
It's like saying, hey, we played the Seahawks in the preseason, so we can beat them in the Super Bowl, I mean, same thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, it's basically, saying, well, I'm a 90% foul shooter in practice and in an empty arena, and then, oh, there's 25,000 people in, and I've dreamed of this moment all my life, and am I still going to be a 90% foul shooter? I would hope so, but probably not in the first 10 attempts that I have there.
This is coming from a guy that used to shoot 90% free throws in practice, and then he would shoot, 70% in the game. So it's very experienced with that analogy there.
75. That's why I stuck with golf. And turned into a coach for basketball.
One more guy, you had briefly mentioned Reed, and I wanted to jump in there, but I didn't want to interrupt you. This is, I've been paying attention to weird little news and stuff. Maybe you know the details of this or not, and maybe it's just going to go on as something I have to dig a little deeper into. But can you confirm that Patrick Reed had a baby born recently, and that his wife is usually his caddy, so that now he has to switch to a new caddy, and being that he's also a first-time player too, right? I mean, it just seems like bunch of red flags for me. Like, he's got a baby he's worrying about right now. He doesn't have his normal caddy, which is his wife, which is really weird. And now he's playing in the Masters for the first time. There's like no reason for me to put Reed in my lineup, right?
Well, that's all true. He has a new caddy. He won with that caddy, by the way, at Doral.
Oh.
He won with, it's his brother-in-law.
Okay.
So they're very familiar. His wife was pregnant. They had a baby. His wife stands about 3 inches taller than his golf bag, so it was always a funny sight to see her carrying the golf bag. It's like that scene in Caddyshack where the 9-year-old gets Rodney Dangerfield's golf bag and tries to put it on. But he's another guy that has a lot of non-competitive round course history at Augusta, and he's the thing I like about Patrick Reed is that he is so confident in his game right now, and so confident in his abilities with that comment of, I'm a top 5 player in the world. And a kind of a funny quote this week that I heard today is Rory McIlroy is paired with him and Jordan Spieth. And I believe McIlroy is the oldest in the group, which is kind of weird.
Yeah.
But he's like, well, I guess there's no top 5 player in the world in this group. So he kind of made the joke because there isn't. But Patrick Reed thinks he is, and he's playing that way. But we'll see when he's playing with the favorite going into Augusta, at Augusta. We'll see how he does. But I like his game. I like his confidence. I just don't like that he's a first-timer.
All right, so a nice solid hour of analysis for you guys for the Masters. So hopefully you got plenty of information. Dave, final thoughts?
Well, as we said about a half hour ago, I think a key to being successful in a fantasy competition here is to come up with a handful of guys in that mid-price range that can anchor your team. You have to have guys in that range who are going to make the cut for you, have a chance to be in the top 20. Then maybe if one of your heavyweights happens to win or a couple of them finish in the top 10, you have a chance. And I think 2 guys you absolutely have to have in your lineup out of that middle group, we've talked a lot about them, are Angel Cabrera and Freddie Couples. I mean, there's absolutely, their course history says they can finish in the top 10. I'd be surprised if either one did, but I've been surprised that every year seemingly at least one of them's in the top 10. I think those 2 guys have to be in the middle of your lineup. Find a couple of sleepers who, we've mentioned, at least a dozen of these heavyweights that all have a chance. Pick a couple of our guys there, but definitely go with Cabrera and Couples. That would be my recommendation.
Chris, final thoughts?
Rory and Phil both handicapped the field this week. Reporters had asked him, how many guys have a chance to win. Rory said 70. He feels has a chance to win. For his first response
Mickelson said 3, right?
Mickelson said about 30.
Okay.
Or, which is about 3, but and he said he also missed Tiger, which I don't believe because I don't think those guys like each other. I feel that balance is definitely a key, and like David said, like you said, I've said, course history, finding Freddie Couples is a must. Angel Cabrera, it'd be nice if you could get him in there. But just look at those guys that play well, and those heavy hitters. It's probably the most wide open Masters in recent history. Just given that there's so many new young players, that all these new winners and guys that are playing well this year, we'll see how course history plays in versus guys that are playing well.
And you don't have Tiger dominating, so that's.
And you don't have Tiger, which is weird. People said it's weird not having him. It's the first time in 17 years he hasn't shown up at Augusta. So if it comes down to you're at a decision where it's a new guy or a guy that has experience, I would take the guy with experience. But balance is key, and just trust your gut.
That's a good tiebreaker, and I think my advice would be, I brought this up again, like Dave's saying, like 30 minutes, an hour ago, but when you're in a tiebreaker with a couple guys, experience is one way to go, but then go look and see what Vegas thinks. If you can't decide, Vegas probably has a better idea than anyone of what the likelihood of someone doing well is. Obviously, it's not like their favorite wins every single time. It's not like that. It's just the odds of it actually happening. You got a guy that's 10-1, they're probably going to win 1 out of every 10 times. So obviously not real high odds, but it's better than most of the field. So when you're between a couple guys in the same price range, look at experience, like Chris is saying, and other tiebreakers, go to Vegas. So that pretty much wraps it up for us. Again, really excited to be able to have some DFS for some big tournaments out there for the Masters. It's going to be weird having a lot of money on the line for some people over the course of 4 days. Usually you have some of these big tournaments in fantasy basketball or fantasy baseball, and it's a one-day tournament. There's not much of a sweat to it. But for golf, it's like if you're in first place after round 1 and you have a chance of winning $100,000, that's going to be a long 3 or 4 days. You're probably going to want to clear your weekend if at the end of Thursday you've got your lineup in first place with a chance of winning $100,000 or so. So it's going to be awesome. Hopefully we're going to have a couple lineups that are competing for that $100,000. So thank you guys for joining us. Hope to do it again soon. We've got great baseball content. Chris is going to have a detailed write-up of his golfers on the blog.fanmouth.com. Then Dave and I are going to join Chris with putting some rankings up there too, so you can kind of see where everyone has their golfers and maybe see if we're all on the same guy. Maybe that's worth considering, or maybe that's worth avoiding, however you want to look at it. But check out blog.fanmouth.com, and we'll see you soon.